Well, good evening, everyone. With that slight delay, we'll call to order this informational meeting of the Mishawaka Common Council. And tonight is a meeting to hear further information and a presentation with regard to a rezoning that's pending before the council. And the proposed use is a Casey's convenience store at the intersection of Douglas and Fur Road in Mishawaka. So tonight's meeting will be somewhat informal, but we look forward to receiving the information. And to the extent that this meeting is being live streamed, if we can, let's all check our cell phones to make sure that we have placed them on silent or vibrate. And with that, we will open the floor. Mr. Studer, if you want to kick things off on behalf of your client, the podium is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, members of the council. My name is Stephen Studer. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Krieg DeVault, with office at 4101 Edison Lakes Parkway here in Mishawaka, 46545. With me this evening is Mr. Richard McMahon, who is the Senior Site Development Manager for Casey's. As you are aware, we are hoping to rezone Mr. Murphy's with us this evening, by the way, Mr. Murphy's property from commercial C1 to commercial C10. This would be consistent with the Family Express, which is kitty corner from this property. I'll make only a brief presentation because I really think that you may have some questions that we'll be happy to answer, and so we'll focus on that. Each of you has been handed a bullet point with a location map attached, so you can see the location of the stores. As a concern raised by the staff and the Mishawaka Planning Commission, is centered around the concerns about the gas station in connection with the well field, the new city well field. So that's going to be the focus of my discussion. First, let me say that 20 years ago, 2004, 20 years ago, Mishawaka, by ordinance, transferred its wellhead protection to the county health department. So back in 2004, they passed an ordinance that said that all wellhead protection would be administered by the county health department. As a matter of fairness, neither Mr. Murphy nor did Casey's know when they were looking at this property that the property was in a wellhead protection area. In fact, at the time it wasn't, nor did we know that it was in a one-year time of travel. There was no public information available to know that. So when the negotiations took place and we moved forward with the petition, at the time, there was no way for us to know that it was in a one-year time of travel. Nevertheless, we found out afterwards that it was in a one-year time of travel, and we met with the county health department. The county health department made it clear that if a gas station was within 200 feet of a public well, they would not permit it. They said 200 feet, we will not permit it if it's within 200 feet. The proposed Casey's is 1,737 feet away, almost 8.5 times what the county health department would permit. The health department has said, and we filed an application with them, that if we build it in conjunction with the application, they will issue a permit for wellhead protection. So the county health department has essentially signed off, and if we don't build it in connection, in completion with the application, they won't give us a permit. We can't open. But they've already said if we build the station the way we provided in the information, they will permit this in the wellhead area. So in 2012, 12 years ago, the city started planning for the new well field. And that was 3 years before the Family Express even came on the table. So 3 years later, after the city had already been planning for the well field, there was the Family Express project, which in all candor, I also represented. So we were very much involved in the process of dealing with Family Express, the modern use of USTs, et cetera. That was in 2015. And in 2015, 3 years after the discussions about the new well field had taken place, the staff fully supported the Family Express station at its current location. In December of that year, 2015, this council, the county council, the Common Council also approved that rezoning. So in 2015, they approved the Family Express location, knowing at the time that a well field was under consideration. 4 months later, after the approval of this council of the Family Express, in April of 2016, only 4 months later, this council also approved the purchase of the wellfield land. They've been negotiating for several years. They actually approved the purchase of the land in April of 2016. Again, knowing at that time that the Family Express had already been approved. I would note, and I'll have Mr. McMahon come up a little bit later, but I would note that all USTs, all underground storage tanks nowadays, have to meet stringent federal requirements. In 2016, the EPA adopted new rules and regulations for underground storage tanks and pressurized piping. The vendor for these particular tanks that will be installed here has provided nearly 19,000 of these double-walled tanks throughout the U.S., and Casey's has purchased over 800 of those tanks, and there's not been one reported leak from any of these tanks nationwide. That's because of the safety standards built in by the U.S. EPA, the way they're double-walled. They have this, and Mr. McMahon will address that a little more clearly and in more detail, but these tanks just do not leak, right? And so then the question becomes, what's the concern, what's the risk? The risk would be perhaps from human error. What happens if somebody, and we've all been at gas stations, Costco, whatever it might be, and somebody is filling up a gas can for the mower and they spill it or whatever it might be. All these stations are on concrete and they filter down to an oil water separator. Well, any gasoline of any significance would be collected and separated from all the water, which would then be going into the drainage pond. So there's built-in safety systems even against human error, and Mr. McMahon will talk about that. We also would note, as far as we know, the city at this point has not installed any wells, perimeter wells, around the one-year time of travel. I understand they do have some wells near the actual wellheads, but Casey's has offered to install at least 2 wells at the perimeter of the one-year time of travel between Family Express and the proposed Casey's, so it would protect if there was ever any spill. And as I said, the idea of a spill would happen for these tanks is infinitesimal. There's no reported such spills. But if it ever did happen, or any other spill, for instance, if there was an accident at Fern Douglas with a truck or something else, these wells would then provide additional protection to the city well field because they would be logged at a particular depth to make sure that it was captured long before it ever got to the actual wells. And Casey's has agreed to install 2 of those wells. Just across the street from this site, they are private. Took all our color ink. Just across the street, there are 2 above-ground storage tanks that literally sit 100 feet or 200 feet. They're on the other side of Judy Creek. They sit on the backside of the golf course. I presume that they're used for maintenance of some type. They do have secondary containment, which is what we refer to as the concrete barriers around, but there's no other protection. It would be more likely that something like this would present a higher likelihood of a spill than these underground storage tanks or spill at the property. And these were just taken just about 2 weeks ago. So, we look at this from the standpoint of the tanks don't really present an issue as far as we're concerned, and I think evidence would show that. The USPA is comfortable with these types of tanks, so the question becomes human error. And as I said, human error has been taken out of the equation, and Mr. McMahon can address some of the specifics about how these tanks operate, how these systems operate, and all the bells and whistles we put into making sure that nothing could ever leak. I would also point out that even if something did leak, by law, Indiana spill rule requires us to notify the state within 2 hours of any spill over, they say over 50 gallons, but Casey's internal memo said anything over 5 gallons gets notified to the state. So there's an Indiana spill rule that requires anything over 50 gallons to be reported within 2 hours of a spill. So there's lots of protections here. We also think that, given the fact that there's already a Family Express across the street, closer than we are, with the same tanks, even closer, as I said, but we are not going to impact this well field. And I think that's been the major concern of most people about would the station impact the well field, and our answer to that is no. So at this time, I would either take additional questions or have Mr. McMahon talk a little bit about the systems.
Mr. Bienicki.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Studer. While I do have concerns about the well field, my primary concern is more about Judy Creek. Can you tell me how far away from Judy Creek it is?
I don't know the exact dimensions, but Douglas Road separates us from, in fact, I think the Family Express is close to Judy Creek. We're actually separated by the 4 lanes of Douglas Road from Judy Creek. We will have discussions with both the Judy Creek Board as well as the the county drainage board as well. But we are significantly farther away from Judy Creek, or no closer anyway, than Family Express. Judy Creek wasn't a problem with Family Express. Again, these tanks don't leak. And we're well aware of the significance of Judy Creek. I represented the university when they did the golf course. I got a long history about Judy Creek and its importance to the community. So we're very cognizant of the concerns there. But again, we're talking about groundwater potential contamination. There's no way a spill on this side of Douglas Road would flow over to Judy Creek on a surface basis. We would capture everything in a retention pond and our oil water separators, and the road itself acts as a barrier before it ever gets to Judy Creek.
Will they be selling diesel fuel?
Diesel fuel?
Just for small trucks.
For small trucks, yeah.
Okay,
It's not going to be one of these pilot stations, isn't that right?
Well, the reason I ask is, funny you say that, because out at Brick in the bypass yesterday, there was a semi that caught on fire and 200 gallons of diesel spilled
Yeah.
all over the ground. So, I mean, that had nothing to do with the gas
Right.
station, but it's right there at sea level.
Right.
So, I mean, them things happen all the time, car accidents, things like that. So, and runoff is still a big concern. You know, with me working on cars all the time, these cars are not perfect by any means.
And you make an excellent point. I mean, you can have an accident any place on the toll road. If you look at the time of travel, it's 1 year, 5 year time of travel, that takes into effect the toll road as well. We know we've had major accidents in the toll road with tankers and others. You can't eliminate 100% of all risk. What you can do is provide as much protection as possible, making sure that if there is a problem, that it's immediately addressed. And that's what Casey's would do, and that's what we're required to do by law.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Violi.
Thank you. Mr. Studer, for the layperson here, explain the 1 year time to travel. What is that? Give me the definition in easy terms for me to understand,
Sure.
please.
So the EPA actually sets out, I think, 5 or 6 different methodology to determine the time of travel. So what they are saying with the 1 year time of travel, that if a spill was to reach the groundwater at the site, that it would take a year for it to get to the well site. So you'd have a year to know that.
Okay.
Which is one of the reasons we want to install perimeter wells to the outside to protect anything. There was a problem, as you know, at the well field down on the south side. There was an old 15-year-old spill. They had MTBE, which then no longer is used, as you know. But at the time, and that was a chemical that moved faster than water, but it moved and impacted the well fields on the south side. But it had been going on for 15 years before it actually got there. This provides that, theoretically, that if you had a spill to reach the groundwater, within 1 year, depending on the methodology, it could reach that well. Okay. So that's another reason that Casey came up and said, you know what, we're happy to put in perimeter wells on just the other side of Juday Creek, so if anything would ever get into there, we would be able to make sure that the city well fields were protected. And candidly, I think that the city should consider an ordinance regarding, if you're going to do these types of projects, that you provide that type of additional protection. But in this case, again, as I point out, Family Express didn't do this. We're willing to do that. And as I said, Family Express has been there and had the full support of the council and also the staff. We just think it's partly a fairness argument, but also it's an argument that nothing here logistically is ever going to create a problem. And I think those that know me know that I would never advocate for a project that I thought would ever bring any harm to the city or create any problem for the city. As you may know, I represented the city in all the Uniroyal transactions for all the environmental. It's a large part of my practice, it has been. And so I would never bring to this body or to the city any project I thought had any potential risk of harming the city.
Other questions for Mr. Studer? And Councilor, Mr. Mammolenti.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Studer. Apologize to the folks there that I am joining remotely. And I'm not sure if this question is for you or for Mr. McMahon regarding the number of locations that Casey has.
They have sure, I can answer that. They have over 2,500 locations. They are an American Midwest company. They are non-franchised. These are company-run stores. They have over 40,000 employees. They're very eleemosynary and community-oriented, where they give the employees days off to work in the community. They support charities. I know that in certain cases where they've had natural disasters like tornadoes, et cetera, they've been there. They've sent water and other materials to these locations. It's a large American company with over 2,500 stores and 40,000 employees. And it's a $6 million investment to the city. It's a very large investment.
Great,
Much
thank
bigger
you
than
for
Family Express.
providing that information. Just a quick follow-up. Of those 2,500 stores, how many of them would you say, or you may not know, but have been sold outside of the Casey's family, so to speak, into an independent?
I've been advised by Mr. McMahon, 0. They just added a couple more stations, one over on County Road 17, near the toll road over there in Elkhart. I think is that the newest station? The Elkhart? It might be, so that just opened up. So no, they haven't sold any of those.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? Counselor, thank you for the information and the photo. I actually think that I found one of my golf balls that I hit over in that
How do you think I
area
found the
last time.
photo?
Yeah. Couple follow-ups. You referenced the fact that you were involved in the Family Express rezoning, as well as this being a big part of your practice. So when we compare the environmental protective measures that are being proposed by Casey's to what was proposed by Family Express at that time, has there been any advancement in the technology to the point where now there would be enhanced protection against a spill that wasn't present even in 2015 when Family Express was approved?
Yeah, and maybe Mr. McCann could speak to that. I think in the last 7 or 8 years they've had, and he's got some handouts he can show you some of the way they now analyze. They know every gallon of fuel that's delivered and where it goes. So I think there's been improvements in the systems, just because, as you know, from our own personal use of cell phones and others, we've gotten more sophisticated in terms of electronic detection of device. But maybe Mr. McMahon can address that. But it's been almost 8 years now.
Okay.
9 years.
Fair point. I can't remember what I had for lunch today, so I understand. 2 other questions, and these also might fall into Mr. McMahon's bailiwick. When we talk about the additional monitoring wells, that sounds good to a layperson, but if all that does is just tell us sooner that we have a problem that's heading toward the well field, that doesn't persuade me as much as an additional protective layer. So the long-winded way of saying, I'd like to understand as much as a layperson could what benefit there is to protecting the well field of that advance notice of a spill that's provided by the monitoring wells.
Excellent question. So let me go back to a little bit about Family Express. In 2015, when we did that, the US EPA had not yet adopted these new stringent standards. I think they followed them anyway because they were proposed rules. Now they're instituted as rules back in 2016, I believe. What a monitoring well does for you is, again, it has 1 year time of travel, right? So there are a lot of techniques when you have a spill, a groundwater spill, and I've literally dealt with dozens and dozens and dozens of these over the years, including some at Unioil site. There are a lot of ways to clean that up. There's biological cleaning, there's pump and treat systems, there's all kinds of things. The key, however, is to knowing it early, right? Once it gets into your well and into your system, it's much harder and much more expensive to deal with. So what this does is like an early warning system, just like an early warning radar system. It says, hey, we may have a problem. We're seeing elevated levels of some of the BTEX compounds, which are the 4 major compounds that make up gasoline. We're seeing an elevated level. That's coming from someplace. It lets you identify that and immediately analyze that, and you can actually fingerprint gasoline to know how old it is, where it came from, et cetera. So it gives you that year advance notice. And then the state will get involved, and the feds may get involved if it's really a threat to the water systems. So it's an early warning system. And once you find those elevated levels, for instance, I would tell you, I'm working right now on an asphalt plant in the south side of the city where for the last 15 years we're monitoring every year the water quality. And when we see a level, and we were supposed to be at 0.16, we got to 0.31 the other day on one compound out of 150. we're going back and retest that well to see what's causing it. So it gives you the ability, it gives the city the ability to say, hey, we're seeing elevated issues. Is it from Family Express? Is it from the golf course? Is it from the chemicals in the golf course? Is it from Casey's? Is it from some other source? You know, some of these older homes have underground storage tanks for fuel oil. So it gives you the ability to identify if there's a problem, but it gives you a long enough lead time to fix that problem before it negatively impacts the well. So that's what a perimeter well would do. And I can tell you, on the Amazon site on the west side, which I'm representing, we are putting in monitoring wells out there to protect the city water from New Carlisle for the very same purposes around our temporary generator yards, et cetera, to make sure that if anything ever to get into the ground, they have enough advance notice to address that.
And I believe you may have answered my follow-up question, but just to clarify, so depending upon if in fact these extra monitoring wells were installed, and depending upon where they're located, am I correct, and did I hear you correctly, that they could not only detect spills that are related to Casey's if they occurred, but also spills theoretically that occurred from Family Express or any other extraneous source that would pose a risk to the well field?
Absolutely. You know, we think the groundwater, we haven't looked at geological studies, but generally groundwater in this area flows to the river, flows south. But things could flow north, because when you put a new well in, it creates what they call a zone of influence. It goes as drawing. And so this would detect any types of spills, anything. So the federal government has adopted drinking water quality standards. These are federal standards on all kinds of things, coliform, you name it. And so they are drinking water standards that have to be met by cities in order to sell that water to the public. So all those parameters can be checked. They can check them as often as they want. We are going to build the wells and turn them over to the city. They can check them every month, every quarter, every year, whenever they think is necessary. And if there ever was a spill at Family Express or Casey's, for instance, they can immediately monitor them as well. But again, we don't think that's ever, we think the risk here is not from either one of these gas stations. The risk more likely is from a potential spill at Fur and Douglas with an accident, or an old home, or some old business that we not even aware of. Or it could be something else that used to be on the golf course. We have no idea. All we're doing is providing another level of protection for the city to have that ability to test. And if they don't test, we can't do much about that. But if they do test, then they'll have the ability to say, hey, we have a problem. Drinking water quality for Bethel Anthracene went up from 0.16 to 0.31. What's causing that? And they can do that.
I appreciate that. And to use it as a springboard back to Mr. Violi's question, so with the 1 year time of travel and the enhanced warning that the monitoring wells would provide, is it in fact the case that there are recognized remediation steps that can be taken if that monitoring well picks up a potential contaminant, so that it's not a fait accompli, that there are legitimate remedial steps that can be taken to try to address it before it would reach the groundwater?
Absolutely. We do this all the time. We remediate groundwater contamination, right? You can't go any place in this county. There's been lots of groundwater contaminated sites within this county. And we have some up in Douglas Road that the city has. You know, we know there can be groundwater contamination, but there are you can clean these up in all kinds of technical ways now. We work with a lot of different consultants that specialize with hydrologists and others to clean up groundwater contamination. We did this with the city of South Bend at LaSalle Park, which is a Superfund site. We're constantly cleaning up groundwater. It's the narrative where we live, right? We live on a sole source aquifer which covers 6 or 7 counties. And so we're very cognizant of making sure that we keep our clean water safe. But that's what these consultants do. They have, I've seen demonstrations where they use bacteria, for instance, that eat certain types of gasoline products. They throw live bacteria down there, and these things go nuts and clean it up within a couple of years. We've seen pump and treat systems. Those used to be used a lot more, where they would actually these towers. Because remember, gasoline products, BTEX compounds, are volatile compounds, so they evaporate the atmosphere. So they would bubble them up and let the volatile compounds volatilize into the air, and then they would put clean water back down. So there's got to be at least, I'm going to say, 8 to 10, 12 different remedial efforts that you can take once you know you have a problem. The key for us is always to know that problem's coming far enough in advance to deal with it. And what we're proposing is that we would pay for 2 additional wells. just inside the one-year time of travel on the other side of Jude Creek. So if anything, it would protect also Jude Creek. If something's going towards Jude Creek, right, from the north down south, it would also pick up that. It would pick up any types of chemicals that the city wanted to test for.
And just to make sure that we're all on the same page, is that commitment one that you would be comfortable with us embedding within the zoning ordinance so that it would be an enforceable condition of the approval of this?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, that we'd be happy to make a written commitment to that effect.
And then final question, and again, this might fall into the area of Mr. McMahon's expertise. We talked about human error, and I think that's a justifiable concern, and I appreciate the technological workaround for human error. But what I'd like to hear a little bit more about is what Casey's does to train or certify or ensure that somebody who's unqualified like me, who might be able to work the cash register, isn't involved in trying to deal with the remediation. So if that's more Mr. McMahon than you, I'll hold off on that question until he steps to the podium.
Yeah, I think you'll be impressed with the different things that they do to make sure that we take human error out of the equation as much as possible. You can't eliminate human error. I mean, if somebody wants to come in with a crash into it, but even if they did that, the tanks weren't going to spill, everything's shut off. But if somebody wants to create a problem, they can create a problem. But we can't eliminate that, but we can eliminate human error as much as possible from an accidental standpoint. People just make mistakes. But if Mr. McMahon would like to talk a little bit about the systems, and you have some handouts.
Before we hand the microphone over to Mr. McMahon, are any other questions for Mr. Studer?
I just had a quick one. Thank you, Mr. President. And I don't know if this is the right time to ask it, but sometimes things just pop into my head. I was thinking about the spills and these 8, 10, 12 different methodologies that can be used to clean up a spill. I guess I'm asking for confirmation. Who pays for it?
Indiana has adopted the polluter pays rule, right?
Okay.
So that's why, for instance, in the Superfund case with the city of South Bend, they didn't spill a thing, but they own the property. So they are paying half. Honeywell, which is another defendant, said that they didn't do anything either, but they're on the hook to pay. So in Indiana, it's the polluter pays. Now, a lot of times there's insurance for older claims, but Indiana has the polluter pays, and so they always go after the person who spilled. So in this case, if it wasn't Family Express and it wasn't Casey's, but it was a spill from somebody's underground storage fuel oil tank, you go after them. But again, a lot of those, fuel oil doesn't travel as fast as gasoline just because it's heavier based. But if there was a spill, for instance, at the corner, for instance, of Fur and Douglas with a tanker truck, and it all spilled into Jude Creek and into the groundwater, well, that company, the trucking company, his insurance company would have to pay for that. So we make sure that the polluter pays in Indiana.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else for Mr. Studer? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Richard McMahon. I'm as I said before, the Senior Site Development Manager for Casey's. As you look at me standing here, you're saying, all right, there's a corporate denizen, and he's going to do what he needs to do. I want to let you know a little bit more about me. I wouldn't be representing Casey's right now if I personally believed that there was any chance of contaminating the water resources of this community. I'll start with who I am. Back at 18 years old, I became an Eagle Scout. Then when I went to college, my first degree was in biology. And the most recent example is that my daughter, who's just graduated from high school and is headed off to college, in 2020 became the American Birding Association's Young Birder of the Year. So that's a national competition, and that shows that she's exceptional as far as that. She didn't get that by living in a house where we didn't care about nature. That's why I bring that up. And you can go and Google Grayson McMahon, ABA, and you'll find out. I mean, she's even been written up in the Washington Post, of all places, but all over. So that's because I believe in the environment. So that's who I am. So I wanted you to know that before I start talking to you, explaining why I'm not concerned about this facility that we'd like to build contaminating your valuable resources. The store, when you look at it, it's all concrete, and it's designed so that water doesn't flow out into the street. The Department of Transportation makes sure that anything on the driveways doesn't flow straight out into the streets. And then there's curbs, and it's all designed so that any water, rain, anything liquid that falls flows away from the streets. And there are storm drains around the perimeter of the property and in the middle of the property out there in the concrete. And those are picked up, and those pipes go towards the southeast where there's a detention pond. But before that water goes into the detention pond, it goes into what's called an oil-water separator. And that uses the difference in the viscosity between water and any hydrocarbons to separate. And it also has absorbent pads in there. And those are monitored periodically. We have a requirement to go by, and someone goes and looks at them to, change out the absorbent pads in them. They're there if there was a problem, and we can talk, and you can ask me about, well, what happens if someone comes out there with a truck and opens up a valve in the bottom of their tank in the back of their lawnmower or something and spills 10 gallons, 50 gallons on the site. It would flow across the concrete, it's not into asphalt, and go into these drains. But the store people know immediately what they need to do. These are on site in little containers that we have both inside the store and outside in little closets. And they would put these around the entrance to the storm drain until the proper people can come and pick them up. So that's there to stop that kind of an accident that happens. We've talked about the tanks. I've been in this business a lot longer than I want to admit, but I can remember when I was working for Phillips Petroleum Company, we were taking steel tanks out of old stores, those old steel ones. And some of them in some communities, we took them out. They looked like they'd been put in the week before. But the majority of them were pretty thin by the time we had holes in them. You could even punch through because the soil had, we call it a hot soil, but they would become like a battery working between the metal and the soil, and it would have those steel tanks would corrode. Then they went to single wall fiberglass back in the 80s, and I put a lot of those in. And still, a single wall fiberglass tank can crack, all right? What they have now, we've been talking about double wall tanks, and I'm going to pass this around. This is what the tank is made out of. This is a piece out of a tank. You can see how firm it is, and you'll see that there's two tanks. There's an inner tank, and then there's the outer tank, and there's a space in between it. We call that an interstitial space.
So it's like a puzzle? They go together like this, the two tanks? One wall's on the outside and one's on the inside?
Yes, it's a tank within a tank. And the space between the two tanks is what we call the interstitial space, and you'll see that little, I don't know what I want to call it, but that's where we have
It's like a honeycomb.
Monitors
Almost
in those. And those monitors then will pick up any moisture. So if a crack occurred on the outside and you were having groundwater coming in, the monitors would pick it up. If the crack was on the inner tank and we had fuel coming through, going in, they'll pick it up. And what happens when those monitors pick it up? They shut the whole store down. Boom. You can't go any further than that. And that's automatic. Our employees can't override that or anything. And I'll go into how that's monitored. But then you have the pipes that go in. And in the old days, they put steel pipes in. I remember putting steel pipes in. Same problem as with the metal tanks. Then we went to fiberglass ones. Once again, they can crack. But now even the pipes that lead from the tanks to the dispensers are double walled. We know of no instance where these double-walled tanks or double-walled lines have failed. Period, the end. As Attorney Studer pointed out, the number of them that have been built by our supplier, and none of them have failed, and the ones that we have bought since 2016, none of them have failed. So we've done, there's a lot of technology that's gone into that. All right, so the tanks they're double walled, they have these little monitors in them and in the pipes, and even underneath the dispensers. I can remember the old days, you take the skirt off the dispenser and there was dirt there. And the old employees would take off the gas filter and dump the couple ounces of gasoline into the dirt and throw the filter out and put a new one on. That has a container underneath it, and there's sensors in those. So we can pick up either water or fuel on those. Inside the manager's office, we have a monitoring system that when a truck driver comes in and he wants to unload fuel into the tanks, he comes in and he presses a button on the monitor and he's told how many gallons are inside the tanks. And also we can press that button and we can see the continuing testing of the tanks when, for any leaks. What happens is when a gas station's not pumping any fuel, these monitors are monitoring them. So at night, if it was not a 24-hour store, these monitors, when everything's quiet, they can do all their statistical analysis and see if there's any either increase of volume in the tanks or a decrease. And what happens then is a very loud alarm goes off in the store. All right, if the manager's there, the employees at 9 in the morning and that goes off, they're going to hear it. But also, that monitor goes to Ankeny, Iowa, to our headquarters, where there are people monitoring this 24 hours a day. So we know in real time if these detect a fuel leak. And that's different from the old days when you would go and kind of calculate how many gallons had been put into the tank. It was 7,500, and then subtract how many is sold, and then go out with a stick that had inches on it and measure it and calculate it and then see if there was a difference. That really never worked very well because fuel has a different volume as it goes from being hot in the truck to going down into the cooler tank. So there's always room for an error in that. We tried to calculate it. The system nowadays, that doesn't happen. I mean, it's worked. Plus, the driver, even after he's gone in and he sees how many gallons are in there, and he's already been told to bring X number because we know from our system how many have been sold and bring it. He sees that, then he goes outside and he opens up the cap and he still puts a stick down it to physically eyeball it, all right? Then to make sure that he doesn't overfill it, if he were to try and do that, when the fuel gets up to about 95%, gets up to 95% of the volume, it can't, there's a valve that shuts off and won't allow any more fuel to go into the tank. So he can't, or he or she, because we have women drivers too, they can't make a mistake on that and all of a sudden have a problem that we got to clean up. Even when they unhook the hose and take it off, in the old days, a couple drops would come down, or maybe an ounce or two of gasoline, and that would be in the manhole, and I'll show you a picture of that, but that was dirt too. Even those manholes now are contained, and they have monitors in them.
Looks like an ATM.
So this is Vita Root. They're very well known, and as I said, not only does the store manager and the employees know when an alarm goes off, but we in Ankeny know. Now, I don't know how our competitors monitor that, but certainly no one's monitoring it like we are. Or a lot of people aren't monitoring 24 hours like we do. We're a large company. We're the 5th largest pizza purveyor in the United States. It's kind of amazing. Fifth largest pizza purveyor in the United States. We don't want anything to sully the name that our 40,000 employees have worked so hard, our 40,000 team members have worked so hard to build the Casey's by doing something stupid. And so that's why we have that here and why we have people monitoring this all the time. If you're out on the site, if you're one of our guests and something happens and you see an accident or say two cars hit each other on the parking lot and you have gas leaking, any person on the property can walk over and hit an emergency button. Casey's has these on all of our stores and many of our competitors don't. If you were to go to one of our local stores, you'll see these out there on the front of our concrete area right there. So someone going, poop, push it, it stops everything. There's also one of those. There's also one of these behind the cashier's counter. And the cashier has to have visibility of everything that's going on out there in the front. We couldn't build a store where the cashier can't look out and see what's going on at the dispensers. So he or she also have that ability to hit that button quickly and stop everything. So that's kind of an overview of why I believe this. So I will stop preaching or whatever, and now I'll open myself up for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Mr. Violi?
Who builds your stores? Do you guys have your own company that builds your own stores, or do you hire local labor, or do you have a?
We put the stores out for bid,
Okay.
but not just anybody gets to bid on putting the underground tanks in. There are only a very select few of people that get to install those, and all their employees who work there have to be certified and trained.
Mrs. Volker?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's really interesting to see the different pieces and parts, and just always learning so much here. I did have a question. When you were talking about the oil water separator monitoring, you said, in my mind, things go into the pipes from the concrete, then they go out into the oil separator that's out in a field, and then sometimes people look at them. So is it sometimes people look at it, or is that monitored on a regular basis? Is that important?
It's absolutely important. So all those pipes, they come together just before the detention pond.
Right.
And then this here is the oil water separator, and then the clean water goes out into the detention pond. We have contracts with people that come out and look at those periodically.
So when you say periodically, what does that, is that?
I don't know particularly what it is in this particular area here, but
Whatever
it is
the
done.
regulation is, you would
It is,
be-
but then we also err on the side of safety.
So when
It's a
they
lot
look-
easier for us to monitor that than come out afterwards and clean something up.
And what are you looking for when you're monitoring that oil, water?
Oh, just discoloration, because the hydrocarbons
clean
will
water.
discolor. Well, the pads that are inside it
Okay.
will show, or you'll see a film on the top.
Okay. Okay. All right.
It's all
Thank
right.
you.
Uh-huh.
Just to follow up, so the people that install these tanks and this isn't going to go out for bid. This is somebody that you guys use all the time because of their expertise and your relationship with them, that we're going to make sure the job is done correctly.
I believe we have about 2 or 3 in this area, and I'll call it the Chicagoland area that we use because, yeah, they have
Okay.
to be, it just doesn't go out to somebody that we have no experience with.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you for the information, sir. A follow-up to the question I first posed to Mr. Studer. So based upon the work that you've done in this industry, and, you know, hearkening back to 2015, when the Family Express was approved and constructed at a nearby site, has the technology with regard to protection against spills improved since then, or with the technology that you've described, and I appreciate all the visuals and the hands-on information, but is the 2015 technology what would be installed by whomever does the work for you if this is approved here in 2024, or have there been advancements?
The one advancement that I can think of offhand was the double-wall tanks that were required in 2016, and I don't know if Family Express put them in. I'm sure they did, because they were available prior to then. But otherwise, no, the technology that Family Express has would be similar to ours, with the one exception that they may not have someone that's sitting in an office watching these monitors from our multiple stores to see if there's anything going on.
So with regard to those employees who are involved at the store level with regard to monitoring these situations, how do you train and impress upon them the importance of this responsibility?
That's our culture. It's part of the training. A person who is a manager, you know, has been exposed to our business and knows the importance that we as a company place on that. And then, you know, they are shown and they learn, you know, where the booms are and all the different things about the buttons. And we do have a culture, you know, we're very concerned about that. And so it's all the way down there. Those are our frontline people that represent us to the world, and it's important that they understand it. And I went into one of our stores 2 days ago to talk to a manager in preparation for coming to this hearing to pick up one of these booms, and I quizzed him about it, and he's very much up on what he needs to do. And we have maintenance people that come around all the time that look at the store and make sure that things are functioning. And if something's not, then the manager will wind up having a conversation with somebody about training.
Similar to what you just mentioned, once this equipment, especially the tanks and the sensors and what have you, the safety equipment is installed, how do you monitor and check on that to make sure that it's operating to peak efficiency going forward? Is there a regular cycle where somebody comes and does a systems check to make sure that everything is operating accordingly? My assumption would be that you don't just install it and forget about it and hope for the best, that is there some type of follow-up to make sure that, in essence, what you're promising us that you would do and that your equipment is going to work, that it's not just a promise tonight, but that you follow up from a corporate level and make sure that everything's operating the way that it should?
Well, every couple minutes, when the store's quiet, the interstitial monitors are looking, and
Not
they're gonna make
not a
alarms.
monitor, but does somebody with expertise check on the equipment to make sure that it's operating to manufacturer's specs?
I think the equipment would tell us if it weren't, you know, but there is maintenance people that come around all the time to the stores. For instance, in my other company, my managers could go and replace a nozzle. You know, you'll see a nozzle, sometimes they quit working, they don't shut off well or whatever, and the employees could do it. At Casey's, they don't do that. So we have a maintenance man that's around all the time, coming around and replacing nozzles that might break or whatever. And there's all the other equipment that's inside the store that they're looking at, so they have a checklist. So
Okay.
they're there frequently.
All right. Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Mrs. Hazen?
I don't have a question, but to kind of clarify and help the rest of you, he's absolutely correct. The culture of the managers, the employees, the owners, I mean, it's really important to train your people. IDEM comes into your store and they check that you keep a booklet, that your people are trained and certified. Every cashier, every person working in the store is usually certified. There's like an A certification, a B, a C, and you actually keep a book, the manager usually does, on site with the leak tests. I mean, it's pretty intense. And it is a culture. He's absolutely correct. You will know if this system is not working. As a manager on a day-to-day operation, you'll know these things. And it's hard to explain it, but they're very sophisticated.
And I appreciate that. That's very helpful, particularly from your perspective and background. So you actually asked or referenced a question that I had forgotten to pose to Mr. McMahon, and feel free to jump in with your background as well. You talked about certification. So there's some external certification that employees who are involved in this process undergo, so that it's not just an onboarding process when they're hired, but there's some type of certification that they receive from some organizing entity?
It's usually IDEM.
Okay.
And I'm just speaking from what we did and what was required, and I can't imagine Casey's is not even more sophisticated than we were. But yeah, there were very basic sheets, an A certification, a B, a C. Your manager, of course, was your highest certification. And again, and it's a simple certification, you know, just reading through the text and answering questions and things. But those did have to be kept on site. And when IDEM came in, they went through your book and checked that you were certifying people, that you were keeping the leak tests, that you were keeping all of the monitoring things, so.
Thank you. So, Mr. Studer,
Yeah, I was
Mr.
gonna say,
McMahon,
so-
are your employees subject to that same type of certification protocol?
But your employees get, if they get formal training, in fact, it's part of our presentation, perhaps Monday, we didn't bring this today, but there's actually a manual for how to respond to spills. And one of the interesting things, and it has steps, I think, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And it says, report all spills to Casey's EPA regardless of time of day or size of spill. So they don't even, they go beyond what the Indiana would require or anybody else would require. They talk about small spills, less than 5 gallons. Even though it's less than 5 gallons, it has to be reported to the national people. So they actually get training, they get manuals. So I think if your question kind of went to how do these employees know what to do, they get training manuals. They're trained on these things. They have a manual in-house, and they also get trained on it. In terms of, I think, what you're also asking about, what you're really asking is that does somebody ever recertify the equipment, make sure it continues to work? And I'm sure that's part of the maintenance plus, but we'll clarify that because you're like, I mean, like we all do, whatever equipment we have, whether it's a septic system or whatever it might be, it needs to be maintained. Mm-hmm. And so all this equipment, very sophisticated, may actually tell us when there's a problem or not a problem, but I'm sure that there's things change. And so I'm sure that they have a checklist to make sure everything is still certified. I know, for instance, that the gasoline dispensers have to be certified by the state. So we know about that, so.
All right, thank
But
you.
we can clarify about the types of training they get. We can also clarify about the maintenance schedule that the spill protection that equipment is, how often it's certified or checked out.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. McMahon or Mr. Studer? Before you perhaps move on to another part of your proceeding, one thought that comes to mind this evening, and it makes sense to me, we're really focusing on one important yet isolated issue that's related to this potential rezoning. So my hope would be on Monday that we not lose sight of this critical issue, but also talk about some of the things that we talk about in any rezoning with regard to the appropriateness of the use for that property. And I'm sure that's going to be part of your presentation, but I'm basically saying it to myself to remind myself that we have to look at it in the broader context as well, not only in terms of this one issue.
Absolutely, and the reason we focus on this is because the staff report said this was the one issue, but for this, they would have supported it. We want to make sure we fully address the environmental concerns, what we were doing, the types of things we were willing to do, the current standards, everything else. So we kind of wanted this informational meeting to be more about the environmental, but we certainly were talking about Casey's and the property, Mr. Murphy's property, and everything else as well.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Anything else for us, Counselor?
Nothing. If you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I waited long enough to let the sun come back out.
Thank you.
And thank you for
Anyone
your
else
time.
wishing to, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Watershed thing from 95 coal on Judy
Mr. President, members of the council, Ken Prince, I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development for the city. I appreciate the appellant's presentation. I think from the beginning, we know and trust Mr. Studer. We think Casey's is a wonderful operator. I think they do it right in terms of operating gas stations. I think Mr. McMahon has presented that. And we also love the property owner, who also sits on our redevelopment commission. Having said all that, the one issue, and Mr. Studer hit it on the head right as he left the podium, is our one issue is the fact that underground storage tanks having a fuel center within the 1 year time of travel is an additional risk. And so we live with petroleum in our society, and petroleum is everywhere. Mr. Studer pointed out the small above-ground tank that's at the maintenance facility at the Gulf. But he could have also taken the picture of every gas tank, every leaky truck, every drip that goes there. And I think that what we're talking about here is that in the case of a fueling facility, you're talking about tanker trucks coming in, you're talking about tens of thousands of gallons of fuel that are put underground. That little tank that's above ground has proper containment around it, it's above ground, and that's a much different situation than what we're talking about with a fueling center. And when you think about risk, that's exactly what this is. I mean, we just had an entire presentation about what they do to mitigate risk. And yes, they do wonderful things, but I can also tell you that our well field off of 12th Street was shut down because of a leaking tank. And I understand that technology has greatly improved since that point in time, but petroleum still represents a risk. And Mr. Studer brought up the fact that were under consideration for the well field, even though Family Express was approved prior to our solidification of an agreement for Judy Creek. But to give you an idea, at that point in time, we had not done any investigation regarding the wells. Part of our due diligence was in terms of where the wells actually go on that property. We didn't know that the wells were going on the south side of that property at the time that Family Express went in. And it's also very hard to represent to this council or anybody else of a prospective agreement, of a potential maybe in the future, but now we know it's real. Now we know that the proposed Casey's is located within the 1 year time of travel. And for reference, Judy Creek goes right through the middle of the intersection. So it's equidistant from Family Express and the proposed gas station. So if you're concerned about Judy Creek, it's equal on both sides in terms of that. It's literally piped through the middle of the intersection on a triangular, on a cross basis. So this would be on either side of it. I can tell you that obviously the Planning Commission has recommended against this. Mr. Majeski, our director or our manager of the Water Division, is opposed to this. From the administration standpoint, we're opposed to this. And it's not that we're opposed to Casey's, we just want them to find another site. If you think of this location, any pizza place could go in here by right now, and we would welcome it with open arms, right? A bank could go into that location right now by right. We'd welcome it with open arms. We'd recommend a rezoning for a Starbucks and a McDonald's for this location. It's on a corner, high traffic, we get it. What's not required in terms of a McDonald's and a bank and anything else there, we don't need monitoring wells. We don't need standards regarding how the piping is done. We don't need to rely on staff for the monitoring that goes on with this. So when we talk about risk, where do you draw that line? We understand that Casey's is a good operator, but that well field is going to be here for 100 years. So what are we going to do to protect that well field? We're not opposed to gas stations. We'd love to see them there. We just don't want them in that 1 year time of travel. When we purchased the golf course, we had restrictions placed on the type of fertilizer that could be placed. When we reached the agreement with the Penn family on what was going to develop on the other side of it, we have specific provisions that prevent any underground tanks going in. When you approve the PUD for the auto mall north of Cleveland Road, well beyond the 1-year time of travel. Specifically, a provision was put in, no filling stations would go into that property, all regarding minimizing the risk regarding the well field. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I'm sure we'll have a much broader dialogue on Monday, but I just wanted to say from an administration perspective that we're opposed, and it's, again, regarding this one issue. We think they're a wonderful operator. Barring the well field, we'd be recommending in favor of it. It's true, but that is an absolute factor.
Thank you. Mr. Carroll?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Prince, for giving us the view there. My question has to do with the Family Express. Do you believe the Family Express poses a significant risk to the well field where it stands now?
I think the wording of significant, does it pose a risk? Yes. If that were to be proposed today, we would be recommending against it.
Let me put it this way instead of significant. Does it pose enough risk that you feel the city would be wise to work towards purchasing the property, getting something different so that that risk can be remediated, or is it something that the city is willing to say, we won't take action? We're just gonna let it stay?
And I used this analogy with Mr. Hixenbaugh earlier, and I'll bring it up now, but it's very much like buying the Powerball ticket, right? So the risk is associated, if you hit the jackpot in this case, it would completely eliminate the well field. The likelihood of that is very small. The likelihood of something going wrong gets incrementally. So when you play Powerball, you might match one number. And my question to the council is, why do you want to buy a ticket? This is up to the applicant. The burden is on the applicant regarding the change of zoning, and the condition of the well field is in place. Why would we go, and why would we want that risk? Albeit minimal or mitigatable, if that's a word, I don't know. But that's what we're talking about here.
No, and I understand that from the cases.
right.
And just so you know, I share environmental concerns just as much as anybody. I guess my question is, in the view of the city, again, is it something on the city's radar to work to, at some point in the future, not have underground tanks at the Family Express site at some point?
We are not working on any of that right now. Just the same as the county has a fueling station on the north side of Cleveland Road. These are all risks that we identified as part of that. And our point is that we don't want to create additional risks.
Sure. And then, up on the Veterans Parkway there, it's a large field house, and as somebody who has kids that go to Grand Park multiple times a year, I looked it up. There's about 2.5 million visitors that go to Grand Park every year for that. There's a few things that everybody wants. They want a place to eat, place to gas up, place to wash their car, and a place to sleep.
Yep.
I imagine that all these properties around here, we're going to have a lot more of these types of meetings. Is there a master plan to inform people? I mean, maybe some people are in talks with some of these homeowners or other landowners down there for car washes and more gas stations. Is there something?
It's a requirement by ordinance that the first thing the developer does is they contact staff to talk about the site plan. And the minute that they talked, that their consultants and their applicants came to staff, it was represented to them that that well field was there, and we would be recommending against this. There's no contention of that. And I think that 200 feet requirement of the well field of the county is a joke.
Yeah.
It's an absolute joke. The well field was 1,000 feet away from where the leak was on 12th Street, and that shut it down.
Yeah.
So
my question is for all these other property owners, who may find themselves in the future. Is there something being planned right now to prevent these kind of more contentious conversations so that everybody along that strip knows that
again, our
these
issue
types
is
of
only with the
businesses-
fueling center. So again, in terms of the PEN, the family, the PUD, it prohibits underground storage tanks, but we have no issues with the hotel going in. We have no issues with those other uses that don't have the petroleum associated with it.
Are there any other types of zoning other than gas stations? I mean, I imagine there would be, you wouldn't want heavy industrial, right across the street close to the well. Are there any other things here that we need to be looking at ordinances, or that the city can, have some kind of recommendation that we don't want this here and the property owners know that ahead of time? So it's not
We
here?
do that as part of every zoning request, every annexation that comes into the city, which is why we did it with the auto mall property.
Right.
We put the basic restrictions that we felt we needed on the PUD as it came in.
Okay.
And that's how we address it.
Okay.
The other thing I'll note that when you look at the traffic coming into the rec facility, it will likely be coming from Capitol Avenue. Ultimately, if the data center does go on Capitol Avenue, that utilities will be extended up there. I mean, the intersection of Douglas and Capitol would be a prime location for a fueling center that would be well away outside of the 1 year time of travel. Again, there are other locations for why on earth would we want to put it here in the 1 year time of travel? That is our fundamental issue.
So I guess then, all that said, if that was the case, why didn't we have some form of ordinance proposed by the city to, ahead of time, rather than letting it work through the process and just saying, hey, if we have this wellhead, we put an ordinance in place that does bar this?
So we have an ordinance in place on this property that does not allow fueling stations. That's why I'm saying it's incumbent on the applicant to prove that a fueling station is appropriate for this.
Okay, I think that's
So it's
the part I
currently
didn't understand.
prohibited. I don't know what else you can do.
That's the part I think I didn't understand. Thank you
Okay.
for the clarification.
Other questions for Ken? Mr. Violi?
Mr. Prince, you said the county's, whatever their requirements is, I think you said are a joke. Are we as a city considering taking that process over going forward? Or are we always going to rely on the county to grant the permit?
Well, I think from a wellhead
Right.
protection standpoint, Mr. Studer knows it better than I do. Mr. Hicksonbaugh, I think, mentioned it regarding the potential for that. I think the trouble that we have as a city that's different than the county is that we only regulate what's in the city and not what's in the county. So from a wellhead protection perspective, you wanted to cross jurisdictional boundaries regarding that protection, which I believe why statutorily it goes to the county and not to the city. If we thought it would be beneficial, by all means, we would support wellhead protection. But we've basically found other ways, in this case zoning, to provide that protection.
So we wouldn't eliminate them, we can eliminate them from this process?
I'm not sure if we can or not. That'd be a good question for Mr. Studer. I don't know if we could circumvent the county and remove their authority and create our own authority. That question is a legal one and beyond me.
Thank you.
Other questions? Well, Ken, as always, I and we appreciate the information that you share and your perspective. And I don't think there's a person who sits up here who disagrees with the concept of being very scrupulous about protecting the integrity of that well field. So we're on the same page there. Not so much a question, but a comment. I would, regardless of the outcome with regard to this specific appeal, what I would like to see is dialogue between the administration and the council with regard to whether there should be some new ordinance language that we consider. I'm not necessarily proposing, as I understood Mr. Violi's question, that for the city to take over the county's role, such as it is right now with regard to administering it, but piggybacking on your point, it seems to me that there may be a way within our zoning ordinance to further flesh out our expectation with regard to protecting the integrity of that 1 year time of travel area so that we can provide advance notice to people before they even enter into this type of transaction with a willing buyer that this is problematic from the standpoint of our zoning owners. So not anything that we need to hash through tonight, but a conversation moving forward as we complete our comprehensive plan and moving into.
I think that makes sense, Mr. President. I do.
I appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Anything else for Ken?
I have a quick one, if you don't mind.
Mr. Memolani?
Yeah, it's just a quick hypothetical question. If they wanted above-ground storage tanks, that would be permissible?
Again, it's about the fuel, the quantity. I think above ground would be better, but I think fundamentally would be problematic on other levels. Again, it would make a bad proposal slightly better, but still something that we'd recommend against.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else for Mr. Prince? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to speak? All right. Council members, anything else that anyone wants to share? Then again, thank you, everyone who presented this evening. We appreciate the information. Mr. McMahon, we'll let you retrieve your
Show and tell.
your show and tell. That's a great way to put it. But we appreciate you bringing that to us and all the information that was shared. For the record, as we say, this matter is currently set for second reading and public hearing at this coming Monday's council meeting, 6 o'clock here in the council chambers. So we appreciate everybody's time and attention this evening. With that, we'll conclude tonight's proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you.